feel like I'm never gonna make this video unless I just sit here and yammer and hope that the right stuff comes out of my head and out of my mouth, because I've been trying to make a video talking about recovery for a while now. I've recorded several versions and deleted every one of them, and I don't understand why I can't just do it. And what's frustrating is I'll be listening to someone else's story and I'll hear what they're saying, and then I'll think, yes, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about this, I want to talk about this. And then when I sit down and try to record it, I always just don't know where to start, because I feel like it's such a tangly subject. I feel like there's so many different angles to it, and there are so many different types of people that could potentially be watching this video, that I want to not alienate anyone. I want to provide worthwhile, helpful information, and I also want it to be interesting, because I think these things are interesting. I really love memoirs. I love hearing people's stories, and I'm actually going to include a couple of links in the description of this video to other videos of people who are in recovery or who are abstaining from a substance or what have you, because I always just find these stories so inspiring. And one of the overriding points I want to make before I launch into this whole thing, wherever I start from, geez, I don't even know. I think discussions that come from a perspective of a person in recovery can be valuable to any person, not necessarily someone who struggles with a substance abuse problem or a behavioral disorder. Because the things that you learn in recovery are applicable to life. And I think too, sort of as a counterpoint, or like the opposite entry point, is things that help you find a more balanced life can then lead you to changing your behaviors and your use of substances. So, or yeah, I'm being overly overthinky. Me being overthinky. I'm also enjoying a really good non-alcoholic beer, and I'm like, should I share that? Because I don't know if some people who are watching this who are in recovery would find that triggering. So I'm gonna just refrain from sharing it, but I do sometimes share that in other videos, because I love a good non-alcoholic beer or non-alcoholic cocktail, but not everybody in recovery can do that, and it kind of depends on the individual. So I'm gonna try this again, man. I'm gonna try. I ultimately want to write a memoir. I'm going to. It's just a matter of when, and because I'm an over-the-road truck driver, having time to sit down and really write and really get into the nitty-gritty is basically impossible. But I'm going to give you guys the Cliff's Notes just to give you a little bit of backstory on my life. So addiction, substance abuse, and behavioral problems, or like addictive behaviors, that has been part of my landscape of my life from before the time I personally struggled with them. But it was in my family going back for generations. A lot of people struggling with alcohol and other drugs, cigarettes. That's been a major challenge in my life, is tobacco, nicotine, whatever, however you want to put that. And I want to talk about that because I think that's a really important subject for a lot of truck drivers, especially who already watch my channel. But a lot of the adults in my life growing up were consistent substance users, whether they use it to a point of abuse or not. I went through some extremely traumatic, formative experiences from the time I was pretty young that were very much tied to the total instability and chaos that was a result of the substance abuse that was occurring in my home environment. So what's interesting about that is it led me to a place of, like, from the time I was about 9 or 10 years old, I became very controlling of myself. I became very, I started with cleaning. I was obsessive about cleaning my space, and it led later into obsessiveness with food and exercise. And I grew up as a preteen and teenager during the whole 90s waif heroin chic era, where the models looked like they were kind of dying. And that definitely played a role in a lot of the problem behaviors that I developed around food and exercise. And those are things I struggled with for a long time, like through up until around my kind of early 30s. And things changed somewhat, and they've changed further as I've been actively in recovery. But because of the things I had been exposed to in childhood, I was disgusted by people that used substances. I was one of those goody kids in high school. I did experiment with smoking, And I first experimented with smoking when I was like 9 because I thought it was cool. And marketing was very different when I was a kid too with regards to smoking. And I think that's not a minor thing for many of us. But I didn't do drugs. I didn't drink. I was a good student. I was a band geek. I hung out with my friends. I was very disciplined from a young age because I didn't want to be like the bad examples that were in my environment that caused all the chaos that I was trying to manage. And that's what a lot of it was for me as a young person, a very young person. I had this sense of I have to be in control because I need to take care of shit. Like, the person who's supposed to be in charge here is not capable, so I have to manage and I have to keep it together. That's how I felt a lot of the time. And so I didn't understand substance use the way I came to understand it. I didn't understand the idea of escape that way. My escape was exercise. A lot of it was obsessively exercising until I was exhausted. That was something that carried with me for a long time, and I still have some of that. That'll never go away, I'm pretty sure. But then when I went into college, I really lost my way, and I was just absolutely lost. That's like the best way to describe it. I went through really deep depression. I was anxious and depressed and scared and alone, and I didn't really know who to turn to. I didn't have it in me to like ask for help really because I had this belief that no one could help me, that I had to figure out things for myself. I started to struggle with substances, some pretty serious ones too, and I was involved with someone who introduced me to some real serious shit, and sometimes I think there had to have been some type of divine intervention because things could have really gone another direction, but I'll leave the details to the memoir, so look out for that in like 10 years. Anyway, once I started to lean into alcohol, I think a lot of people who have had problems with alcohol will relate with this, that you start to feel like, oh, this is who I am. Like this version of me when I'm under the influence of this is the better version. This is who I would rather be, It's interesting because there were times when it wasn't as much of a problem. It was kind of a on and off, and it depended on other things in my life, but I learned kind of early on to use it to escape from things when things were bad. I'm a person of extremes in general. I always have been. So I have a tendency to go hard at whatever it is I'm doing, and that can be a real problem when you're talking about a substance whose very action, when you ingest even a small amount of it, is to lower your inhibitions and lead to poor decision making. Because no matter who you are, how smart or disciplined or focused you might be, that's what happens. That's the nature of the substance. And part of why I want to talk about that is I think there's a misconception about people, especially who struggle with alcohol, that they're weak, and other substances too. And what's interesting is so many of us who have struggled with those addictions are people who are very controlled, very disciplined. We're people who feel that when we use a substance like that, there's a very distinct purpose for using it, which is to alter our consciousness, because we have made a very clear to ourselves, a clear decision that we are not going to stay in the state that we are in that moment. And that's part of like that sense of identity too, of like, seeing yourself as this person who is in control and getting to a point of like, I haven't had enough of being in control and I don't want to do that right now. I want to be this other version of myself. But it's like, you are not really being real with yourself as to how the substance is then starting to take control. You think that every drink that you have is you choosing to adjust. It's like a little dial that you're turning. You're lying to yourself because it's real easy to do because it makes you feel better, temporarily. That kind of leads into another important idea that I've come to really understand in my time as a person in recovery, which is that addiction lies. And that's the easy way I put it to people when I'm in a meeting setting and like just talking about it. All right, I got interrupted by a phone call, so I'm back now. So where were we? Addiction lies. I think that's just an interesting idea because I don't know how exactly to boil this down, but I'm going to do my best. Underneath so much of these behaviors that we engage in, whether it's looking at our phones too many times a day, or it's, indulging in like sugar that we know is not good for us, but we just feel compelled to keep ingesting it, or the myriad of different behaviors that people can have problems with. Underneath that is this animal instinct, and it comes from this haywire survival mechanism. A lot of that to me comes back to the idea that we live in a world in which so much of what we are expected to do is at odds with our actual nature, because we are animals. You know, we have this incredibly complex brain relative to many other animals. It's so hard for me not to go on a tangent when I say stuff like that. The whales are smarter than us. Anyway, let's not. We always have this, it's hubris. It's a very human characteristic to think that we are bigger than that. You know, we're bigger than the thing. And it's like, no, we're not. We still have the same dumb brain chemicals that are like sugar good, you know? And it's the same thing with something, any addictive substance. It's amazing how good we become at tricking ourselves into thinking that it is not harmful when it has gotten to a point where it clearly is. And I'm the queen of that, because that's something I've really struggled with in my life where, man, I've talked about this in my meetings with smoking. Like, I love smoking. And I say that in present tense, even though I do not smoke, and I hope to not smoke again in the future. I will talk a little bit about weed, but that shit will get you demonetized, which is funny. I talked about it in a previous video, and I'm a big believer in speaking really honestly about these types of things because it's like relatable, especially in our modern world. One of my videos got demonetized, and I generally don't monetize videos where I'm talking about stuff that I really want people to see, because I don't want to deter people when they get interrupted, the video interrupted by a commercial. But then I heard in another creator, a very successful creator, talking in her video saying that if you don't monetize it, the algorithm doesn't push it as much. So it's a weird conundrum. So I will attempt to monetize this video and hope that it doesn't get demonetized, because I want more people to see it. I want videos about recovery or people talking about their experiences from an honest perspective. I want those things to be seen by as many people as possible, because the whole point is that it can help you. It can help you feel like, oh, I'm normal, you know, because you are. If you struggle with these things, or if you're a person who doesn't think of yourself as someone who struggles with substances, but like you want to change your behaviors around certain things, like that's fine too. You don't have to like change your whole sense of identity because, you know, you don't like something that you've been doing and you want to do it differently. And that's been a really important thing for me to come to in my time as a person in recovery. So let me backtrack again and just explain that I always, on and off, had problems with going too far with alcohol, especially. I had, you know, successfully quit smoking after having been like a enthusiastic smoker. I smoked for like 4 years during my college years, and I was a heavy smoker when I was smoking, and I managed to quit. And then in late 2011, I was married, had been with my husband for 10 years, and our marriage came to a very sudden and very unexpected, and I decided to not feel my feelings. I decided to stay as numb as I could, because I made a conscious decision that I was not going to process that. I wasn't ready. I was in some level of denial. I was in shock. My whole world just shattered like overnight. I already was drinking more than is healthy. That led to a lot of problems in my life, which again, that's for the memoir. Things were dangerous back then. I was engaging in harmful behaviors. I was putting myself and others in serious danger with my actions. Let's just leave it at that. You can do the math. But then things went to a new low when I started bartending. And I know that's a big duh for many of you, but by the time I started bartending, I was already in a deep hole. I really was struggling for years with suicidal ideation. I had started seeing a therapist, and I was just shattered for so long. You know, one of the things you learn when you go through a serious loss and you go through grief is that you can't numb it away. You can't drink it away. It just sits there and rots while it waits for you to come back to the surface. And that was what I learned the hard way. And it's hard to talk about in a way because there's a part of me that's so present to that grief, that aching, just raw grief, that I just hated waking up in the morning. And I would just stay up and drink as much as I could at night to just obliterate myself. That was what I wanted to do. I wanted to not exist. It got so bad, and I had started bartending at this place where I was working for a really kind of objectively terrible person whose whole MO was just like, I mean, I shouldn't say that because it doesn't really matter. That person isn't that important really to the whole story, but it was an environment like a lot of small towny bars where you're very much encouraged to drink with the customers. Like they want you to drink with the customers, and then they try to tell you to like fake out the customers and pretend to take shots. And I could never do that if I wanted to. I just, I would get caught probably, I'm too honest. And I would just, that was when I started doing shots, which I had never really been a big shot person. And doing a lot of shots, and that was when things went to a really scary place. And that was when I started to experience a lot of changes in my mental health relating to alcohol, where I started to lose my whole sense of who I was. I felt trapped. I felt like I was not going to be able to get out. I was really scared. I was a wreck. I couldn't do a job. I was working at the bar, and I had also been working as a server before that, and I was the worst server of all time because I was always super hungover and I couldn't keep my thoughts straight. And I was smoking weed too, but not heavily at that time. And so I would get really wasted. I would drink a lot of alcohol, and then I would smoke a little bit of weed, but it was enough to make me just, my brain was like Swiss cheese all the time. I couldn't string two thoughts together. And what that does is it creates a cycle of anxiety. And a lot of people don't know that, but I think it's one of those things that bears repeating, even if you do know that and you have heard it. It's funny because at that time, around that time, I was really good friends with, I had been in culinary school and I just finished culinary school, and a couple good friends of mine had a supper club in Chicago that was freaking awesome, and I used to go over there and assist them in putting on these really great dinners. There would be like a lot of wine, and there would be a welcome cocktail, and we would just start with that cocktail, and then we would drink wine all night, and we would stay after the guests had left, and we would drink into the wee hours of the morning, and I would drink until I was just sick. But the funny thing about that is one of my friends was a PhD student, and his research was on the effects of alcohol on the brain, and he actually studied rats or mice, I'm forgetting which now, I think it was rats. His entire graduate thesis was on the relationship between alcohol and anxiety in the brain, and how it's basically becomes like a feedback loop. So that was really important for me to learn that early, but I was in such a deluded state, not deluded state of being, that I was like telling my therapist that I need medication and stuff, and it's like, no, I was just drinking myself into a state of anxiety and depression that felt like I couldn't get out of it. It was just a loop. And when I got desperate enough, I went to my first meeting. I went to Smart Recovery, and I always want to be thoughtful when I say that there are different types of recovery that work well for different people, and apparently the research shows that the vast majority of people who recover from a substance abuse addiction do it without a group, which is amazing to me because I found it so much easier to be a part of a group. And then I became a facilitator, and then seeing people come through the group, and you see the way people change from when they first show up to even like a few weeks later, a couple months later, a couple of years later. It's really incredible to see the way people transform, and it really drives the point home that when people are in a deep place of struggle with a substance, they are this shell of themselves a lot of the time. When you're a person who is in that meeting, who has been there for a long time, and you've been sober for a long time, you're able to look at that person and recognize where they can go, how they can get out of it. You can just see it, but it's so hard when you're that person and you're new and you're fragile and you're just aching and you're in pain. It's so hard. I went to my first meeting in October of 2014. I simultaneously decided to start volunteering because the meeting was held at a retirement home. And so I started volunteering like a month later, maybe. I fell in love with volunteering, and I'm going to go back to what I was saying before, but that's something that I can't emphasize enough. If you're a person who is struggling with yourself, with your head, with depression, anxiety, with any other type of mental illness, with addiction, whether it's substance abuse or behavioral addiction, I cannot recommend to you enough to seek out some type of volunteering. It doesn't take that much time. You can dedicate an hour every other week. You could work with seniors. That is so fun and rewarding. It's not as sad as people think it is. It's awesome most of the time. You can go to an animal shelter and spend time with dogs or cats or other types of animals, and that is incredibly healing. I've done that too. Volunteering with dogs is a wonderful experience. There is someone out there, I'm talking to you, anybody who's watching this, anyone. There's someone out there who needs you, no matter how you might think you're messed up for whatever reason. I guarantee that you're capable of helping someone else. And when you get outside of yourself, that's when the healing starts to happen. Because the thing that we maybe don't realize when we're stuck in an addiction is that we are just hiding inside of ourselves, and it's a very selfish place. And I think of one of the things that's been a really helpful sort of analogy to me is to think of, or I don't know if analogy is the right term, but to think about the double-sided coin of self-loathing and self-pity. That is a very common characteristic of those of us who struggle with addiction. That was me, man, for real. It can be very difficult to snap out of that. It's, again, another loop. It's a loop of bullshit that you get caught up in, which is part of what I have coined in my meetings, and you're welcome to borrow this because other people have. I call it the swirling shitstorm. It's like the tangle of thoughts that you have that lead you astray and keep you in a state of struggle when you can pull yourself out of it, but it's really tough when you don't first work on your thoughts. So this brings me back to what I was starting to talk about before, which is SMART recovery. Different people have different ways of approaching recovery, and that's fine. SMART is an acronym for self-management and recovery training, and it is based in cognitive behavior therapy, and we use various tools to help us change the way that we talk to ourselves. That leads to us changing the way we think about ourselves, and that can help us change our habits. For example, one of my favorite tools is disputing irrational beliefs. I've used that for a long time. It's something I always will come back to. You know, when I was early in recovery and leading up into that, I hated myself. Like, I didn't believe that self-love was possible. I remember bawling my eyes out in my sessions with my counselor, therapist, and saying, like, when people say they love themselves, I have no idea what that means. Like, I don't think that's possible. And I believe that. I can't tell you how different I feel now, and like how effective I can be as a person, and how helpful I can be as a person to others, and how now I understand that that's actually what my purpose is. Like, I feel, and it's kind of maybe like a high-minded thing to say, like, I'm a middle-aged person and I know my purpose in life, but I do. I love trucking. I love a lot of different things. I love making artwork. That's another major goal, and that's a major facet of my person. Like, that's part of who I am to the core as an artist and a writer. But what my real purpose is, what brings the most meaning, the reason I exist, is to help other people, or help to just be a helper, which I know that sounds super cheesy. I'm borrowing from Mr. Rogers, who was a very important part of my childhood, forever, still love Mr. Rogers. Who cares? I don't care how it sounds. When you see it, when you recognize it in yourself, it just is what it is, and it's okay. I couldn't have ever come to that awareness if I hadn't gotten out of this haze. There are plenty of people who do 12-step recovery. That isn't something that ever appealed to me, because there are certain tenets of that system that don't work for me, and that's fine. And like, it doesn't mean it's bad. It means that different people have different approaches, and we've had people in SMART who also did 12 steps. For some people, that's really, really helpful. Like, my grandfather stayed sober for over 20 years doing 12 steps, doing AA. So hey man, do whatever helps you as an individual, whatever it might be. This brings me to something really important that I want to share about recovery. One of the things that makes people avoid recovery is feeling like they have to give up everything. Recovery, to me, what I have found really, really helpful is, instead of thinking of it as reduction and like of discipline, like, because that can lead me to not great places from, you know, what I was talking about earlier, is adding stuff in, adding fulfillment in to crowd out some of the stuff that's not fulfilling you, that's not serving you. So that's where volunteering came in for me. That's where talking to people who are also struggling with their addiction came in for me. That's why going to meetings is so powerful for me. And that's where I will say, to help you understand how I understand SMART to be different from AA, is that in SMART, we go around and we share things as a group, versus in AA, people generally get up in front of a group, as I understand it, because I've never attended an AA meeting, so I want to acknowledge that. But people will get up and speak, and there's no crosstalk, but we crosstalk quite a bit in SMART. That to me is more, that helps me more, but that's just one perspective. You know, addiction makes us feel so weak and broken down and small. It changes your sense of identity, and the sense that you can feel like if you're not partaking in this behavior, you're not going to be you anymore. People aren't going to like you anymore. You're not going to be fun anymore. You're going to be too uptight. That was how I always felt. Like, I'm so uptight, and I'm more like a more relaxed, fun version of myself when I'm fucked up. And it's like, I'm actually a more relaxed person than I've ever been as a sober person. And I enjoy my life more, and I'm more genuine, and I laugh a lot more. I want to talk about my addiction to weed some, but I don't want to get into it too much in this video, because I feel like it's like a whole other subject, but it's something that a lot of people relate to. I'll just say that when I didn't fully quit alcohol right away, I was still bartending, and I thankfully got away from that one bar that was a real problem, but I was working in other places where I could still kind of drink while I worked to a certain extent, and no one would really care. I didn't absolutely have to remove myself from that situation in order to change it, but it was more than that. It was that I didn't feel good about myself in that environment. I wasn't challenged, and that was really bad for my own struggles. I need to feel useful and challenged in my life. I never said this, but I might as well. I worked at Chicago Theater, downtown Chicago, beautiful historic theater. It's when you see the Chicago sign, that's it. I loved my job there. It was awesome. I have wonderful friends I worked with there, and that was the kind of job that is much more professional, where you cannot drink on the job. Like, you're gonna get fired if you do that, which is perfect for me. It was great, and it paid very well, so I was able to, sustain a decent living for a while working there. I also worked at the Riviera Theater for a little bit. That was a similar idea. You could not be drinking on the job at that place at all. I love working in live music venues. I love being a part of it. It's everything about it. I could definitely do it again in the future when I'm an old lady. But yeah, I had a really hard time with weed for a long time, and that's a long story, so I'm not going to get into it. I do have some old videos about it, so if you want to look back through the archives, you can see, but I will probably share about that in the future. It was a major struggle for me to quit. Major. I made many false attempts before I finally did it, and I really wanted to get a CDL, and that was a huge motivator for me. It's weird because I've actually read things about drivers who, like in forums, who talk about like they still get away with smoking weed while they are truck drivers, which I think is completely insane. Like, I can't tell you how little I would want to do that. Like, that to me sounds like that's nightmare fuel for me. Like, nope. No, I never want to be anything but sober when I'm driving a truck, or in any time surrounding the time I drive a truck. Like, I wouldn't. Yeah, and that's me also. I'm not trying to sound judgmental, because everybody's in their own journey, but I take what I do very seriously. I take safety very seriously, and I don't want to be in any type of compromised state. It's a very mentally demanding job, whether people realize it or not. It requires a lot of focus and a lot of mental energy to be safe out there. So anyway, what else can I say? I guess I will just leave you with, if you're somebody who's really having a hard time, and there's competing voices inside you that say, I can't see my life without this thing, and then the other voice is saying, this is messing us up, we can't keep doing this, then I just want to encourage you to know that things can change, and you can still feel good inside yourself. The things that you feel like you're getting from that substance or behavior or whatever it is, the good feels that you get, those good feels can magnify. They can not just be there, they can magnify without you depending on whatever that thing is. You're stronger than you think you are, I promise you. I promise you. Your life can still be every bit as fun, or more likely more fun, if you're not depending on something, because that thing is keeping you in a state where you're not able to really experience yourself fully. And whoever you are that's watching this right now, I guarantee you're probably 1,000 times cooler than you even realize you are. These substances, they lie to us. you know, and they give us this way of telling ourselves that like, oh, I need this thing for XYZ reason. And believe me, I did that to myself for a long time, many years, like decades, before I was able to make a change for a long enough period of time that I could look at myself and go, I'm pretty cool. I like myself. Other people like me, and I'm an effective human, and I'm doing good shit, and I'm gonna do more good shit because I don't have this albatross. I don't have this, I'm not dragging around this weight behind me that is just weakening me with every step. I don't have to do any of that. You don't have to do any of that. And there are people you've never met who are eager to help you, who are waiting to help you, who will be your friend, who will hold your hand, who will listen to you. Those people are everywhere. They're around you right now, whether you know it or not. I promise you. I promise you. And there's someone who needs you. You can be useful. You can bring meaning. You can help someone else heal, and at the same time, you can heal. And even if you're listening to this and you don't necessarily have an addiction problem, you're just a person, well, guess what? We all have the human condition. And it's, man, it's a motherfucker sometimes, ain't it? But yeah, I just want you to know that you are supported by me. You're supported by people you've never met that are all around you. And I just want everybody to know that, because this world can feel really harsh and cold and isolating, and the current time that we're in is especially difficult, and you're not alone if you feel that way. So I just want to send some love your way and send some hope your way, because you have every reason to grab a little bit of hope and feel it and hold on to it. Okay, I'm glad we had this talk. Okay, this is probably gonna be a longer than usual video, and I'm gonna try to let it be that way because this stuff is important and there are people who need to hear it. So if you would be so kind as to comment down below, share anything that you think is pertinent. If you have any pointers, anything you want to share that has been helpful to you. If you know somebody who you think could benefit from what I've said in this video, please share it with them. I will try to talk about this more in the future. I tend to focus my channel on trucking stuff, but also I'm a human and I like to talk about human stuff too, because all of this stuff is important for many people to hear. So thank you for watching. I will catch you on the next one.